In this video, I'm going over 7 tools for active listening. So first, what is active listening? Basically, it's listening in a way that isn't just giving the other person room and time to speak, but rather it's listening in a way that engages with what they're actually saying so that you're mirroring it back to them. And a lot of times active listening is taught in a way where there's a listener and there's a talker, and the listener is sort of the one asking the questions, the one listening to what the talker is saying. And I think that's true, and I think that's a really good way to start with active listening. But ultimately, the best kind of active listening is in two-way conversations where both people are engaged in both active listening and active talking, and there's a back and forth. All right, so what are the tools for active listening? The first tool is echo questions. And echo questions are simply where you echo a word or phrase that a person said in a way that kind of invites them to expound on that. So for example, if you're listening to someone and they say, "I'm thinking of changing my major, but I'm not sure how my parents will respond." Here are some different possible echo question responses. You could say, "How your parents will respond," or you could say, "Changing your major," or you could say, "You're not sure how they'll respond," or you could say, "You're thinking of changing your major." You're basically pulling out from what they said something that incites curiosity in you and inviting them to go further. And this is not a mindless thing. If someone talks for a minute, pulling out the phrase from that minute of them talking that has the most emotional depth, the most interesting follow-up, that's a skill. And it's a skill where you're intuiting where someone's head is at, what the tensions they might be struggling with are, and what they might have more to say about. So echo questions are the opposite of mindless. Really, they're about, I'm listening to you so carefully that I'm able to pick out the little clue in what you said about where it would be meaningful to go deeper. And if you do this in an iterative process, the conversation can go really deep rather quickly. Now, the second tool for active listening is kind of related to the first. The first is echo questions, where you're echoing just a word or phrase. The second tool is the verbal mirror. And this is basically where you reflect back word for word exactly what someone said. Oftentimes a full sentence. It doesn't need to be a full sentence. But the difference between this and the echo question is the echo question is really about go further on this little piece. The verbal mirror, on the other hand, is really about showing people what they just said so that they have a chance to look at it and evaluate it from the outside. And this can be a tool that's used in confrontation. This video is not about confrontation, but I wanted to mention this particular tool second because it's so similar to the echo questions, but it really has a different function. So oftentimes this is used when someone says something that you're not sure they actually believe themselves. So an example of this might be if someone said, "Everybody in the class thinks I'm stupid." You might reflect that back to them saying, "Everybody in the class thinks you're stupid." And when they hear that, they can hear how ridiculous that sounds. And they might respond with, "Well, maybe not everybody, but blah, 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 blah." And they'll sort of go deeper in a way that's actually more what they mean and what they believe. So it's a little bit confrontational, but it can be really helpful if someone says something that either you're not sure they believe it, or perhaps you think it would be good for them to evaluate that, hearing it from somebody else's mouth. Because of course things sound different when they're coming out of our stream of conscience than when we hear it from another person. So it really gives them a chance to evaluate what they've said. All right, the third tool of active listening is tentative lead-in phrases. And these are phrases that sort of precede you explaining your understanding of what someone's saying, but it sets it up in a way such that you're okay being corrected. You understand that you could be wrong, you're just sort of proposing what you think they might mean. So examples of tentative lead-in phrases are, "If I understand you correctly, I gather you're saying, it sounds as if you seem to be saying, I'm picking up that you think, what I think you're saying is." So all of these are going to lead into you describing describing your understanding of what they're saying, but you're doing it in a way that doesn't say, oh, I know what you just said, I understand you, because you recognize that communication is difficult, and oftentimes what we hear is not actually what they said. And if we speak too arrogantly about our understanding of what they said, that can rub people the wrong way, particularly if there's a misunderstanding between us. And if you practice communication a lot, you'll realize how often miscommunication and misunderstanding happens. So by framing any understanding we have of someone in a way that is humble and that leaves open space to be corrected, that it's respectful of them, and it shows that we're not trying to impose on them our understanding of them, but really we're trying to truly understand them and be corrected where our understanding is not quite there. And the next two active listening tools are really what follows up the tentative lead-in phrases. So the next tool is going to be conjectures about perspective. This is really where you're hypothesizing their perspective. You're trying to come to some understanding of what their perspective is, and you're trying to communicate that to them. So here's an example of this with a lead-in phrase to begin with. If I understand you correctly, you believe your professor's behavior is dismissive of you. And they may not have used the word dismissive. They may have just sort of described the whole situation in a frustrated tone, and you're trying to understand from them, how are they perceiving the situation? How are they understanding it? And you're sort of hypothesizing a perspective that might match with what they're saying. Another example of this might be if the listener said, it seems like trust is the biggest factor holding back your friendship with this person. So perhaps they were just talking about the friendship and the frustrations and some incident, and you're hypothesizing what is it that's holding this friendship back. You're hypothesizing that it might have something to do with trust, and you're inviting them to either correct you or else to expound on what that means for them. So the next tool for active listening is similar. It's just conjectures about feelings. And so while perspectives is really about how are they perceiving a situation, feelings are about how they're feeling in a particular situation. And this one is a little bit more intimate. It might not be appropriate for all situations, but this can be really powerful in terms of giving people the space to acknowledge their feelings, the space to express their feelings, and in terms of validating that you are thinking about things and feeling about things from their perspective. Examples of this might be if the listener said, it seems like that experience would feel really isolating, or you seem proud of your sister, or just, I'm gathering that you're feeling frustrated. And not everybody is comfortable using feeling words, but feeling words can be really healing, really helpful. And so for people who aren't comfortable using feeling words, sometimes when the listener uses those feeling words, it sort of opens up permission for them to talk about things that perhaps their family would not have been comfortable talking about, but maybe they would like to talk about. They just don't know if you're comfortable talking about feelings. All right, and the last two tools for active listening are question-related tools. The next tool is open-ended questions. These are questions that invite an entire speech from the person rather than a specific one-word, two-word, or informational answer. So for example, instead of saying, were you planning to talk to your sister about this incident? You could ask, what were you planning to say to your sister about this incident? And if the answer is nothing, then they can say that, but the framing of that question sort of invites a bigger response and gives them permission to sort of take up more space talking and to talk to you further. Another example might be instead of asking, what colleges are you planning to apply to? You might ask, how are you going to decide which colleges to apply to? The first question is more closed-ended because it has a fixed list of colleges where it's sort of inviting just the informational content. Whereas the second question is inviting them to talk about their thought process, about how they're thinking about it, and it really opens up a wider conversation. Now, I will say, it's hard to ask open-ended questions, and oftentimes when we ask something closed-ended, like what colleges are you applying to, people will go ahead and expound. So none of these tools are really hard and fast rules. People know the context of conversation, but But if you can get in the habit of framing questions in an open-ended way, it sends these subtle cues that you want to hear a deeper answer, and it can also sort of shape the conversation in a way that goes deeper faster. Because sometimes people don't know how deep you want to go with them. They don't know how much you want to hear from them, and a lot of people will not risk going deeper unless they're fairly certain that that's what you want too. So as an active listener, using tools like open-ended questions can communicate to them that you really do want to go deeper with them. The last tool of active listening that I'm going to cover, at least in this video, is who questions. And these are questions that really ask a person about themselves. Rather than information, rather than what's going on in their head, it's asking questions about who they are as a person and how they see themselves as a person. So here are some examples. What did this experience teach you about yourself? What pushes your buttons? How do you generally handle that? How did that experience change your approach to relationships? What part of that was outside your comfort zone and what part of that was in your comfort zone? So really, these are questions where you want to get to know them as a person. You want to understand their identity, how they see themselves, how their interaction with the world defines them, all that stuff. This kind of question can be a really powerful tool to have more intimate conversation. So those are just 7 tools of active listening that are really useful.